Okay, welcome everybody to the Wednesday, February 26th meeting of the Municipal Building Blue Ribbon Committee. My tang got tangled.
I understand.
And we have a couple of housekeeping items. We've had questions flying in to the manager, Peter Rice, and we appreciate the curiosity, but I think let's try to follow the rule. If you have a question, to send it to the chairs, either Kate or I, or both, and then we can make sure that that's shared with the whole committee and the answers that we get are shared with the whole committee. That's better than going into the middle of the staff organization and asking a question that nobody knows until after. Mary Lou.
I was trying to get information on the handbook, and I've read the handbook, and I was wondering about, I did call, I ended up with someone in the legal department because I wondered if it was okay for me to talk, talk to people who are outside of this committee, and I guess the answer is yes, that I can get information.
Yes.
But I did call looking for information within, whatever's been written up by the legal department.
Yep. Handbook,
The handbook.
the
The
volunteer handbook. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That
It didn't
should be
say
all
that specifically, so I did make that call.
right. And the other request is, look at the online resources first. Often, as we accumulate a record, there'll be lots of stuff. If it's not there, ask us.
John, I'm still waiting for two items I asked for one item left, and that's the expenditure, and still have not gotten it. Has it been posted?
We're going to touch on
Hasn't been
that.
posted. It's something we're going to talk about today.
It's what?
It's coming.
It's coming. We're going to discuss it today. We're not posting that
Right here,
information.
right now,
It's
today.
coming up on the
For you,
agenda.
Peter. We're going
You had two questions.
to have that.
I got the other one
Talk to you later.
close together.
Okay.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to read the minutes from the 12th?
Move we accept.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Cook for this segment. She has a guest for us.
Thank you so much. Today we have with us Tori Brooks, who was instrumental in helping the Sustainability Committee draft a green buildings policy for the city, and working with the staff and working that ultimately came to the city manager and was approved. So that is our working green buildings policy, and Tori is really the expert. So we're going to bring her up to talk about the green buildings policy. And Tori, I'm going to share your slides, okay?
Thank you. Thank you all. I didn't know I was first in the hot seat.
Yeah.
I was settling in.
Okay, let me get this shared.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Keat. I really just wanted to create an opportunity when I saw this Blue Ribbon Committee was meeting regularly, and considering the work we did on the green building and infrastructure policy, which I think was actually 2023, which is mind-blowing. And just create an opportunity for conversation and to bring up some points that might be relevant, and just to be a resource. A little bit of background: I work in the green building space. I've worked in Portsmouth. I've worked on the federal level now, and really balancing sustainability and the triple bottom line of sustainability, right? So people, profit, planet, making sure that it works in all of those realms for better buildings or infrastructure, and that's really where this policy came from. If you want to just, I from my understanding, you all have seen the policy. It's also on the city website. So it covers new buildings. It covers renovations, retrofit, additions, as well as paving projects around the city. It is specific to municipal controlled projects and funded projects, so it does not extend past the municipality. And we worked with many of you on this policy, lots of iterations going back and forth, making sure that it was practical, but also, continues the history of Portsmouth moving the needle forward on great, sustainable public buildings. So, from my understanding, there's some interest, especially on the retrofit side and on the renovation side, and on the economic side of how these sustainable practices really can help the bottom line on the operational side for the municipality. So I did pull a couple of statistics from this, but I'd also just love to kind of open the floor for any questions, any specific questions around this. I'm happy to walk more in detail on any of the individual items if there's interest, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So I pulled 3 categories that you'll see in the policy. The policy has kind of what the design criteria would be. So the way this would really be implemented is, this is something that could go to whoever the designer was on the project, so that they have an understanding of the expectations of the city. And each one has a when it applies, right? So for the most part, we're targeting big projects, and making sure that on larger projects with substantial funding that we're achieving these kind of basic sustainability standards. So you'll see in there there's upgrades on facades and windows, right? Windows, doors upgrades. There's huge economic benefits to the city. I've thrown some up here, but 30% of heating and cooling energy is lost just through windows in most buildings, even though they make up 8-10% of the area. And so upgrading facades, windows, and buildings is not just nice for the windows themselves and things like bulk water leakage and all of the stuff that we've all dealt with, but also on the cost of operating our facilities. Similarly with insulation, and this includes, adding insulation, but also sealing buildings better. So, blower door tests are something that we see in construction more and more, and creating envelopes that are more sealed, but you can also do a lot on retrofitting structures after the fact, and looking at historical structures for properly sealing or insulating spaces that have not traditionally been insulated. This also opens an opportunity to look at the envelope and insulation of a building, and address other issues that happen in wall cavities, that happen in structures, things like bulk water, things like mold, things often we've all opened something up and maybe found some structural concerns that, so I wanted to flag that this is also goes hand in hand with a lot of those things. And then the last one is that I wanted to highlight is just HVAC, mechanical, MEP upgrades, especially on the heating and cooling side in a lot of our buildings. Obvious huge savings given our client region and how much, especially on the heat side of things, how much we pay for heating in a lot of our buildings, and therefore the opportunity for there. And I tried to put it in context and add some actual dollar values on here with like roughly the size of many of our municipal buildings, and I tried to also add some of the payback time on the general cost. Obviously, these are all very dependent on how in-depth the projects are, but in general, we're looking between like 3 and 7 years of payback to initial investment, and then after that point, you're just seeing savings on the operational energy in a lot of these buildings. And then on the sustainability realm, right, how we do each of these things is a whole nother conversation. There's a lot of decisions to be made. And so that's also within this policy a little bit. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
John?
Yeah, John O'Leary. I've been involved in various projects with the city, and I think, and what you're talking about is certainly true. The downside is, what does it cost to do these things? I mean, when we built the library, we had a very, very sophisticated HVAC system that was built in. We had to drop it. The money wasn't there to do it. So I think, that's one of the things that, I don't want to throw cold water on what you're talking about, but the reality that if I'm building my house, and you say to me, if you want to spend an extra $10,000, you're going to save that, there's going to be a return of that in 3 to 5 years, that's great, I can do that. One of the problems you deal with when you're dealing with a municipal budget is that you, in some cases, you don't have that flexibility. So, certainly happy to look at all of these things, and some of them, we did a lot with the library, but there was a lot more that we could have done. But frankly, as is the case with most municipal projects, when push comes to shove, you're trying to squeeze into the budget that you have. So can you address that,
Absolutely. Upfront cost is a huge part of this conversation, especially given the timeline of most of the projects we're working on and when budgets get set and the current climate around construction cost in itself, which, I've had my share of very scary estimates come across my desk as well. It is the reality, and we need to face that. With that said, I think this policy or conversations like this open the door for whether it's designers or whoever is delivering on these projects to, from day one, understand what the expectations are and use tools like life cycle cost analysis when we're looking at systems, and that becomes built into the conversation on the front end. And so in that, upfront cost is part of it, as well as however long the city wants to look out on long-term operational. And I think that it's important to do that as early as possible, because if that conversation does not happen early, then those rough estimates that we go off of early in a project that the budget then gets built on, then that may not be realistic when push comes to shove, when it's actually designed. That's really where we see that gap. So having that clear for whoever is delivering on this planning or later design process, it will only help to ease the upfront cost, but the reality is, in an ever smaller margin field like construction costs right now, it is continuing to be a squeeze. And I think this is where advocating for things that are not going to be problems down the line is really important, because whether it's the budget now or it's the budget every year for the next 30 years of operating a building, right? We need to be looking at the comparative cost, but it is a challenge. There's no doubt about that.
thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I think this drives at, and John, that's well said, but this drives back at understanding the scope and aperture of what it is that we're talking about. What you mentioned around windows, just to use that as a very simple example. If 30% of our annual spend on energy to keep this building heating and cooled is going out the door, and we can reduce that to 10%, what does that save over 50 years? So to me, it all comes back to how big is the project, and then that informs all the other analysis we need to do around whether or not there's a margin there to be recovered. And to your point, John, over what period of time do we need to capture 100% of that incremental cost for us to sit here and say that that's a pill we can swallow? Because it may not be the full 50-year usable life of the building. It may be 10 so we need to have that kind of dialogue around what it is that we're comfortable with based on incremental spend versus return on that spend. And so to me, the undue burden clause gets at all of that, though. I mean, it basically gives this group and anyone who's planning a municipal project, the way it reads to me is, if for any reason, more or less, we find it to be an undue burden, we can cite that burden and document it, and we move on. So I think that's addressed here.
Yeah, and that came about from conversations with DPW to make sure that no one was getting backed in a corner while we were also trying to
Right.
achieve these goals, and that's
Can't
really
sign up for
important.
something that you can't deliver on.
Right.
Right. Makes sense.
And the size, to your point on the size, that was a big part of the conversation as well. And even down to, do we do it by the square footage or we do it by the cost of the project? We ended up kind of doing both because we couldn't quite decide. But it is, even because of the cost, even of those analysis, the cost of having designers and figuring out how much these things cost has a cost. So
Right.
we really wanted to make sure that we were spending the effort where we had the biggest bang for the buck, and it's not on, every time we've got to replace a window in the city, it's a burdensome process. That was not the goal.
Will you come back at the end, once a final decision is made, and review and tell us anything that may have been missed?
I would love to do that. I mean, technically, it's a city policy, so we can, in my view, by handing this to the designer at the end, like, once those decisions are made, this type of thing gets handed to the whoever wins bid on the project to execute the work. But preemptively, yes, also making sure that we're on the right track for success for that person executing the work is also something, and I'd be happy to.
Or in the final design, they missed something?
Yes, that is the other side of it, right? As designs are dynamic and forever changing, we want to make sure that it's being followed through on.
Great.
In my view, honestly, when we were writing this policy, good high-performance building practices cover 60%, 70% of what's in here. The rest of it is just getting people to think about things a little bit more and trying to get that conversation early so that all of our projects were considering it. But really, many things in here are really standard practice or built into building codes at this point. And we had a lot of great conversations with the inspector and building codes here in the city on that.
Any other questions for Tori? I just had one for Joe. The library is our silver LEED certified building.
Yes.
Now that we're 10 or 15 years out, have we seen the operating savings?
This conversation actually is very good timing. Very, very good timing. Peter and I, just prior to this meeting, we have finally had a presentation from EEI, a firm that has been doing audits of, I think, 7 or 8 buildings for us. And they just handed us this spreadsheet, which talks about.
And it's not available, it has not been vetted.
Draft.
Don't get all excited yet.
Draft.
It will be shared.
How many
eventually.
copies are you going to make right
It
now?
will be shared, but it's not available at the moment.
This was a draft for us to review. But they do, in fact, there's a lot of information here about the library and City Hall and Public Works, and it talks about available grants, rebates, our average utility bill savings potentially, our reduction in CO2. So all of the information that, Tori, you're looking for, we're almost there. And it's in amazing detail for us to understand.
But the challenge, to answer your question, is we don't have a baseline to compare it to. We don't have a building that was there before to say how inefficient it was compared to today. I can say that there are certain aspects of the green LEED certification design that, in hindsight, we wouldn't have pursued. Low flush toilets, great example.
Yeah.
We've been chasing plumbing challenges in that building for 10 years.
The amount of energy and fossil fuels and trucks coming to unclog them, and
Yeah,
it's far outweighed this.
any green space,
Yeah.
So, but the thing to bear in mind too is, in this case, it's really the delta between the cost that you're going to have to spend anyway and the cost to do it a little bit better. So it's not necessarily,
Yep.
you're all, it's all new.
Marginal.
And oh my God, it's $1.5 million to do this. No, it's $1.6 million versus $1.5 million. And is the payback on that extra $100,000, acceptable?
And if I can add on the LEED side of things, we had a lot of conversation about the LEED requirement and what level to do it to. It's LEED Silver in the current policy. The other thing we chose actively was, we could have chosen some of those things within LEED and dug them into the policy. We chose not to do that, to not be redundant instead, and to give freedom on projects to select the parts and the credits in LEED that work best for that project and make the most sense. But we highlighted some of the ones that we knew were really important. Energy and atmosphere, that was one we highlighted to make sure that operational energy was, okay, go get LEED Silver, but really focus here. Rainwater management was another one. Flooding concerns, making sure that we're shedding water in an appropriate way. We tried to highlight those ones within the LEED rating system to kind of orient projects towards the ones that we were like, these ones are the really important ones, and the rest is up to the individual project to do. But I think that was a good place. And again, we still have the undue burden cause. So, but I think it gets projects on the right track.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the Madbury Water Treatment Plant is a LEED certified silver plant,
Yeah.
which was the first in New England, if not the country, for an industrial plant that was LEED certified.
And
So
that came after the library.
that came
Not by
after
much.
the library, not by a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
But really, a lot of very innovative approaches to how to deal with
Right.
exposed water and tanks and things like that for energy control. So.
Yeah, we just, in the Energy Committee, we did look at a breakdown of energy costs. We just had dollars, we didn't have units, unfortunately. But the library, on paper, had a very light footprint for natural gas. And it's small, but
Yeah, we're wrestling with electric cost right now at the library because the rates have fluctuated, and I actually have all the bills from last year and this year, from the past 2 years, and the library is using a lot of electricity right now. We're trying to figure that out. And we have HVAC systems that already need upgrading. I feel that that's a new building for, all the buildings have to take care of. The library is one of those new buildings. It's not a new building. It's not 200 years old, so I think it's a new building, but.
Joe, you mentioned tax credits and grants and other things at the federal level, and
Yeah.
I assume probably some at the state level, but given that this is New Hampshire, probably limited there. Does this report, and I understand that it's draft, and I'm not asking for this report today, but does this report get into any of the detail elements around, for specific assets on our city's balance sheet, what's available? And do we have any visibility into the availability of that over some period in the foreseeable future, given that a lot of those programs are experiencing some volatility?
Yeah, yes, and yes to all your questions.
Well, not the projection into the future, though.
Well, the
We
volatility,
asked
yes.
we asked the question, but it was, for now, they were secure today,
Yeah.
based on the
Right.
programs.
And given the, okay, understood.
Right. But,
Asked and answered, thank you.
but it does,
I
but it-
just,
the reports do speak to those availabilities and what
Okay.
is still available and
yeah,
what is.
understood. Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
I want to flag too that there's a big conversation happening around like rebate readiness, right? And so you build these things into your project and you build
Right.
multiple things in, and then depending on what the current atmosphere, climate, and availability of
Right.
Yeah.
rebate programs, it's much easier to then you have a menu
Right.
of things that you might be able to fund by other mechanisms,
Right.
rather than designing as usual and then being like, oh no, what if we want to go get this rebate, but
Yep.
that means we have to do a redesign or we have to rework the budget, becomes a really big challenge. So
That's
I hope
where I was, yeah. I think my concern, to your point, is we do this design now, and we break ground at T plus whatever, and what is the availability of the things that we know that are available now then, and then what does that mean for the bottom line net upfront cost to our tax base here?
Well, related
Because
to
it
that,
could be a
obviously.
significant swing.
Related to that volatility are cost of building materials, right? We still-
All of these things,
this-
yep.
this- All of a
No.
sudden, there's so much unknown for us in cost.
And
Agreed.
I should add that the city's finance department does a really good job of having us plan for worst-case scenario for a lot of things. So a lot of times, like especially on the water sewer side, we do planning to fund a project, and then later we're fortunate because we got a grant that relieved us of some of that burden, rather than not planning to pay for it. We plan to
Yeah.
pay for it, so.
And to that point, grant readiness, part of our design process is always saying, all right, set it up so that is, submit the paperwork to make it rebate available, whether it's not, and oftentimes you get the check after the fact, and it's like, oh, that's great. So that is part of kind of standard practice for us.
thank you for coming, Tori.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
Yep.
so much. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this.
Next, when we met last, Cameron advised us, I think sagely, that unless we know our future space needs for the municipal side, the way we've sketched them out for the police side, we don't have a baseline to look at our space needs. So we talked to the city manager about future staff and space needs. So take it away.
Sure. And I think what we're going to speak to addresses the question you had, Peter, about what's been expended to date, and we can go from there, because that will help inform how we spend going forward. So to date, we have spent a total of $443,305.29, to be exact, in monies from FY '23, '24, and this current year, '25, on the police station feasibility and site selection. So what that means is back in April of 2022, we were authorized to spend up to $1.4 million. To date, we have issued $500,000 of that. The balance of that authorization is therefore $900,000. So that is available and scheduled to be authorized in FY '26 as part of the police facility. It was $2.8 million, and in FY '27, the balance, $38 million. So I think that answers your question. What we'd like to do moving forward so that we can get a handle on what are the current city space needs and how would they lay out in a new facility, the idea would be to contract with a design firm, and I'm going to turn to Peter and Joe because they're the smart people on this, about we are shaping the next scope of work that should hit the street in the form of an RFP or an RFQ within the next week or so. So, Joe and Peter, do you want to carry it from here, that piece?
I can tell you that the language, that it's, you're absolutely right. It will be next week that hits the street. The language is, I would say it's 99% complete. We're just going through, again, another meeting today with Ronnie and to fine-tune that RFP, which requests design services for the police facility as well as improvements to the municipal facility.
The idea would be to take off on the work we've done to date and add to it, which will then, to Cameron's point, figure out what are the needs of the rest of the people in this building, and how do you mesh the two. So the thing that follows that information is the harsh reality that we won't have that information until the designer's on board and has time to do some work. So at the rapid rate of how we procure things,
Oh, boy, I have
by the
all-
end of April, it would be great to have a firm on board.
Yeah.
And then we're going to need to give them some time to do their work. So in the meantime, I know that the question's been asked, do we have a list of square footage by city user? And I don't know the answer to that. Do we have any
Joe
rough?
does know the answer to that.
Okay, well then there
I
we
do
go.
have that answer. What I don't have is a spreadsheet to hand to you today. I'm sorry.
Yep.
That was
Well, we can speak to that, and that can be a
absolutely
handout
buried,
for.
but we have that information. It exists. I need to format it in a way that specific to the request.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll generate a table.
Because the current
Answers
table,
questions.
has that information embedded in every single city building that I manage. And I know how much of it is office, how much of it is with the total square footage, but I need to extrapolate out of that and be very specific about this facility.
So let me just ask the question. This document here will be reduced to basically, this information will be provided in a report.
Correct.
Table.
The table. Yeah.
Does that project growth?
Tabular format.
Does that project growth or other plans that the manager may have?
Well, on the topic of growth, we had experienced growth in the last 10 years, much growth before I got here. There was a bit of a dip during COVID. I think we're back up to staffing levels that we don't anticipate growing from. I think growth is.
Stasis?
I think the idea is stasis, correct. I wouldn't plan for new space needed.
And that 2016, 14, whatever date numbers in the space that was generated from that did look ahead and did a projection. But as the city manager said, we don't anticipate it growing. If anything, we actually, it probably will shrink a little bit
Right.
in certain areas.
Something we would like to explore with the designer when they come on board is, for some departments, there may be an ability to build more efficient space, which means not dedicated office or cube space to one individual, more like touchdown or hotel space that that many people in many different workplaces have benefited from. And there will be some that can't have that. There's some departments that will need to have confidential space, walls, and soundproofing and things like that. But to the extent where we can achieve that kind of efficiency, if we had blank plates to deal with, that would be ideal. Because there is, as you remember through the tour, a ton of inefficient use of space, given the fact
About
that...
this a little bit at the organizational meeting, but will that designer, once you've engaged them, will they start interacting with this group?
At our direction and management, absolutely.
Yeah, the intent is, the RFP is structured to say that, part of the intent is to be able to give you the answers to some of your questions so that, you can get better informed, we can get better informed feedback from you all.
What are you asking in the RFP of the designer?
What are we asking?
Yeah, what are you asking them to do? And just, is this a quals? Is it?
It's a quals-based selection. The scope of work, obviously, is to review the police needs, as well as point-of-service needs for the. Do you have a copy right here?
I'm just looking to see it.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to be cute.
No.
I'm just trying to figure out how it works, how it interacts with this group.
So you're going to have to do first, you're going to have to do the existing conditions portion of it, to look at all the existing reports that have been done, so you have an assessment of what that is. You have to look at what the refined space needs, which is going to happen. So they're going to have to be taking the matrix study, which is underway right now, and incorporating that into the police needs, looking at all the adjacencies associated with the police needs, and then looking at the city's municipal needs and integrating them and looking at alternatives. But first of all, you need to come up with a basis of design. So that initial enabling work would create a basis of design, which would be, it's going to be X square feet for the police. It's going to be X functionality or space for the municipal functions. And then that basis of design gets agreed to, and then out of that basis of design, they come up with 3 general alternatives that then you select one of those alternatives to do final design on. So you have to do some level of design effort to get to those three levels. And then, so those 3 would be, would be getting input from you, would come back and show, here are the 3 alternatives. There would be feedback relative to that, vigorous discussion, I'm sure. And then out of that effort, I would assume we would come up and settle on what the final design would be based on.
The one thing I think, as a designer myself, that I would see would be a range of space needs with each of those alternatives, not a X value for
and Rick,
option A and what B value for option B, but they're depending on what they learn from the police, what they learn from analyzing existing conditions, what we've started to learn, and I hope we'll learn more the more we dig in. There are options. I think there are some options that haven't been considered previously.
I don't disagree with you. I gave a thumbnail sketch of how the process is. Obviously, you bracket those things, the high and low approach. There's going to be, we're not going to go through with this committee and talk about the detail of the scope of work.
I'm not asking for that.
But it's, what you're saying is going to happen. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions and to give input, and that's baked into the RFP, is that they understand that this committee is important to that process.
Mary Lou?
I had a question about Matrix Consulting on December of 2024. They were hired to conduct an assessment to help the city and the community evaluate the needs related to policing, staffing, community priorities, and how to accomplish these priorities within the parameters of the municipal complex. Do we have any of that information? I feel as if this committee doesn't have the information that we need to even talk about where we're going.
I agree, Mary Lou,
Yeah.
because the information's not there yet. When you get it, it'll
That's
be
what I'm
presented to
asking
you.
for. When would that be
And
available?
I can chime in on that.
Yeah, May, April?
Yeah, I just had my interview with Matrix, and they're working through the council, as well as I'm sure they're working through Mark's people, the chief's people. He said, we'll have answers for you in April.
So it feels like we're jumping the gun on this. I think this is important information. And last June, I think it was, I'm just going to say, last June, the question was asked, is there a needs assessment at a city council meeting? And the deputy city manager said that would be ready in 4 months. So I don't know what we're waiting for. Do we have the information that this
We don't
committee
have it
can
yet,
work
Mary
with?
Lou. We're working on it.
It was 4 months from the start of the project. The project wasn't started until December. So 4 months from December, or, you know, it's on
March,
track.
April.
I was referring back to a comment that was made at a June.
Through the chairs, if I may,
Yes.
there's a lot of information that we don't have yet, that you don't have yet.
Right.
So in that sense, it's premature to make plans
Make decisions.
in advance of that information being present and available for all of us
I
to
agree.
digest. So I think that we're going to talk about that further in the agenda, about what's a reasonable work plan, given that we have some missing pieces.
Yes, and we're trying to,
Agree.
I think it's really important that we're trying to provide you with some of the background
Yes, I have
information that
that,
you
yeah.
need now, because we can provide you that.
Right.
And we will get there.
Peter?
Karen, thank you for the, I think you said 443,000.
Yes.
To date. Can you, in a report form, break that down of where that went to, what was accomplished? One of the things I want to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts that have already been done.
Yes.
Or before we decide who to have do something, have we already used that person and didn't come up with a
I
satisfactory?
think we can probably answer that right now. It's
Yeah.
It all went to LaValle Renzinger.
all went to La Valley.
Yeah, and ADG, which is their sub-consultant, plus Underwood, who did their site
Underwood
civil
did the
work.
site work.
But also their subconsultant, though, that the contractors with LaValle Renzinger and their subcontractors to them were.
But it is safe to say that the quals-based RFP that's going out right now leans heavily on the work that has been done. So to your point, we will not duplicate or replicate any work that had been done. They're going to be handed that as a body of work to inform the next phase.
And if I might, what did we get for that? First, we had a space plan done for the police department, which started out big at 72,000, and the chief and his staff whittled that down to 49,000. We went through a site selection and looked at 5 different locations and concluded that we should be here. We did schematic designs of how the departments should fit together. That all exists, it's all on the website. And finally, we did a preliminary sketch of a new wing, which everybody saw, and then a follow-up, a gentler approach to that new wing. So that was what that money got.
That's important to remember, is that the actual title on that purchase order was site selection, right? It was not, we hadn't hired them yet to get into a much higher level of detail about specific things. It was, let's get to a point where we know where we're going to be first. So, yeah.
But it is informative with respect to some of the adjacencies in terms of police
And we got
functioning.
more than that. yeah.
And that was one thing that was provided that was very useful as a tool. I mean, I think that's one of the things that has been really, one of the many things that have been really lacking with policing here. And from a perspective of, I've been in a lot of police stations, the adjacencies are just not functional at all. And have probably never really been. They piece it together and make it work because that's what they've been tasked to do. But it's not the way we want to do police work in our community. I can say that very clearly. And so with respect to those adjacencies, it's important to take into consideration in the whole of the project, because to look at it, when we're looking at the space in total, if we can't accommodate the adjacencies, it's not going to be a functional police station.
I think this is a really important point, because this is the question I was asking, because I can look back at all the things that are provided online, and I can see the way things are adjacent, but I don't know the reasoning behind it. And that leads us actually into our next agenda item, which is considerations for police building workflow and the layout from IACC, which I didn't see before. So I specifically asked for this, and I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Tabor, because he helped provide this for me. And so that's why we provided those slides to the group, because it kind of helps explain those adjacencies.
For the guests here, there's some extra printouts right over there.
Yes, if anyone wants them. And you want me to share it online? I can share it up?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So I don't interrupt, Mr. Chair. As you explain it, could you explain what are guidelines and what are requirements, if those both exist within the slide?
Okay.
Okay. So
Yep.
If you know, I mean, if you know.
Well, I'm going to rely on the chief and Kate for that as well, but Chairwoman Kate,
Not counselor, police chair.
what was it, 2 years ago,
Yeah.
2.5 years ago, Chief Newport, Kate Coyle, myself, Buzz Scher, went down to an International Association of Police Chiefs Conference, and it was put on by architecture firms, and it was, what's the process to build a new police station? And we got a 140 slide deck back from that. Thank goodness Councilor Cook paid for the upgrade on Adobe and was able to shrink that down to the slides that you have. But I think what we wanted you to see was some sort of brand-new, latest state-of-the-art floor plans and layouts that are happening around the country. Now, a lot of these places are in the west or west of the Mississippi where land is cheap. That's not us. But what I think you can see, just running through patrol, detective, and evidence and dispatch, you know, patrol, if you look at some of those layouts, let's go right to the patrol.
All right, you go to patrol there.
Just taking a moment to catch up over here.
Is it catching up yet? I don't know if it wants
Did
to
you
do
click
that.
full screen mode?
I did. It says my screen sharing is paused.
John, not to interrupt you, but what was the date of this report?
Doesn't want to do that.
3 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, probably the fall of 20, it was before
I just-
COVID, right?
Stop that.
After COVID?
It was
After
post-
COVID,
it
I
was
think it was
after
fall of
COVID.
23.
Doesn't like full screen mode.
Yeah, so 2 years ago.
Yep.
A year and a half ago.
2H23.
Stop share and go back.
Yeah. But just
So,
highlights, and please,
23?
okay, I have to do that.
those who were also there chime in.
Is it up?
Oh, Joe was with us, too.
I was there as well.
And Peter was,
I have the certification.
That's right.
We all became certified.
So,
so, I mean, I suppose that gives us an unfair advantage, and what we want to do is try and level the playing field with these, a quick look at these slides. This patrol, not there yet.
would you want me to go to the next one?
This layout here. Here's a,
This one? Do you want this one or do you want this one? Okay. You go back.
this is locker rooms. These are female locker rooms, male locker rooms, a little bridge area between. They've got their separate bathrooms and showers. And there's a conference room, and then this flows right into patrol. So, you know, that's sort of the modern way that it's done. There's small touchdown stations for report writing for patrol officers, and a lot of break rooms, a lot of decompression rooms.
John, has anybody taken a look at that, this? Because this is the design of the ideal station, and fit it into what we have available to see if it at all works.
Oh, I would say the design that we have currently, we did that.
Yeah, that's exactly.
What we came up with design was the only way that we could make it fit, which is why it ended up with what we presented.
In terms of going out the front, if I may,
Correct.
Chief, it's because in order to get these adjacencies without, and staying within budget constraints and looking at all the options of where to come out and keeping everything functional, to get those adjacencies, that modified front view was the way you could achieve that and still also have the community space in terms of not just the adjacencies for operational, but also the interfacing, the community interfacing end of it with people wanting to come into the police station in our community and making sure that access point was good as well. So.
Yeah, and what we haven't looked at is if we move other municipal functions.
Well, that's-
the piece we haven't looked at yet. Yeah. So,
Because, for instance, if you took the second floor, and I'm going to call it the city clerk, the assessor's office, that's the second floor.
Yeah.
And just ran the police department all the way down, all right, and out the back, and have an additional addition back there for space.
So
We're a long ways from there.
Well, I know, except,
Yeah,
but we're looking at something like this, which is the ideal if you build a brand-new station.
No question about it.
And I think that's why we don't want to get off track, because that decision was made. There wasn't enough money available to spend $70 million.
So,
Right.
so Peter, to answer your question, one of the options did look at the necessary changes to the configuration of the building to stay within the building, minimize the addition on the back, but it had a lot of structural challenges associated with it because there's columns every so many feet,
Right.
and the height of the space was a certain height, so it required significant construction inside the building, changing the structure itself, and there was additional costs associated with that. So that was the most expensive option
just gonna say.
initially looked at.
It was significantly more expensive than doing the bump out on the front with using the existing space.
Another thing that's taking place is if we're going to do something within the confines of the building, is we would have to be moved to temporary space, which would be a significant cost.
And it's not just temporary, it's like long-term temporary, you might as well,
It's like building a new building.
3 years.
yeah,
But you're,
2.5.
In stages, yeah.
Well, like, you can't just move the police department to mobile trailers across the street in the parking lot. We have to have all the structure that we have now.
dispatch and all the concerns, and when you bring someone back for booking, for intake, for holding, I mean, there's a lot of considerations that aren't analogous to really any other type of relocation. That's just very exclusive. Storage of evidence, these are chain of custody, there's all, I mean, innumerate. And so I think the relocation cost is non-trivial, as well as like just from making sure we maintain as a community the level of service in the face of that. It's sort of a logistical nightmare in that respect. Not that it can't be done, but.
And the purpose of what you're doing right now, is not to talk about what a new building needs to look like or anything like that.
Yeah.
I believe the effort here is to talk about, the question was asked, in a police department, there are certain, we overuse the term, but I'll use it again, adjacencies that bring out an optimum, performance. What I believe you're trying to do here is to talk about what you went to and how these adjacencies work, so we can take these into consideration as we move forward.
Right.
Right.
Right. In other words, how would the design of the floor space work for function, maximum function?
Right. And this is important because sometimes it's obvious to us about, in the municipal side, what things, like, you need to access the clerk's office. You don't want the clerk's office on the 4th floor behind 3 doors, right? You want it to be accessible to the public. The same thing with meeting spaces. You want them to be easily accessible to the public coming in. But it isn't always obvious what is needed on the police side. And so that's why we're sharing these slides, because frankly, I don't know what those adjacencies look like. I can guess, but I don't know, so.
I went through these, I thought this was helpful. It's being described as the ideal police station for how many officers?
Well, I shouldn't say ideal. I should say these are some layouts of the last 3 or 4 years. In other words, if you want to see what community policing layouts look like today,
These are examples of PDs that we took tours of when we were down at this conference that range from a PD that may have been, 30 employees to Alexandria PD, which had hundreds of employees. So you saw a
We
range.
visited each one.
So we went to 3 different.
But I would
places.
imagine it's a matter of scale. A department of 30 officers would have a smaller scale, same set of
Same dates.
needs. Thank you.
Sure. And to your point, it's exactly that, which is, it's just a matter of skill, but the connection points, like the connection points to detectives and evidence, or be the Sally Port to booking, to, those types of things, rather than, the certain amount of square footage that we need for any particular space.
Well, one reason I ask is I wonder if are there like steps at a certain level you need these additional police facilities because
Right.
you have this many officers.
Right.
Like one thing I noticed in here were the holding cells, and I think you said you didn't really want much of that. So that's discretionary then, I would assume.
Yes.
Right.
Are there certain things that aren't in these slides that you think should be in these slides, or do these slides incorporate everything you think we need to think about?
I think these are just examples. I don't think we put like a lot of time in saying specific, that's what we need here. These are just showing examples of what a modern facility looks like in comparison to, you took a tour of our facility, and if you look at these areas in our facility now, they don't look anything like these.
So this might be more best practices of how to assemble things?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah, that's a
The
good way to
jigsaw
do it.
puzzle.
Exactly.
Considerations.
And they actually had go ahead, Kate.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to add that this is, and it's a good education, because when you look at the work of LaValle in terms of putting those pieces together, it's like, oh, that kind of makes sense why we did it this way. So, I mean, things like most of these departments don't have a consideration for ICAC. And we have a ICAC, we're so fortunate to have an ICAC team in Portsmouth. It's complete, a really unique feature across the state. And so that has to be, that's specifically accounted for in our layout, the layout plan that LaValle did, but you're not going to see that on these models. So this is just sort of an education.
The layout we have is particular to what we do here in Portsmouth, and, this could be particular to what they did there. So they may do things that we don't do that they need that we don't need, and vice versa.
Helpful, thank you.
Along those lines, would it make sense at our next meeting, or put it on the agenda, to go through the last iteration that we had, so that it can be specific to Portsmouth versus a general discussion like this?
I was thinking along a similar line, but also if we're looking at April before we have the consultant on board, maybe our tour of Dover could happen between now and then, too.
Well, we'll get to that in the work plan, but I think that's a good idea. We should learn from what we've already developed.
Right. Bring it in, go through it.
Just a few other high points.
John, give his hand over here.
Oh,
It's still relevant to the document we're looking at. The last page speaks about an EOC, or an Emergency Operations Center. I just want to remind folks that we have an EOC in place at Fire Station 2. So unless I'm misspeaking, we would not be looking to replicate an EOC in this building.
See, but part of that is in that community room, training room space. There's a lot of federal money if we, grants that could potentially be available if we have a redundant emergency center, because let's say something happens at Station 2.
Yep.
Where are we going? So there could be a benefit to adding that piece to,
To date, we haven't added it.
right.
Maybe we haven't had that. Right.
And that's the type of space that could be multifunctional.
Correct,
Right? It's not
yes.
exclusively as an EOC.
It's not built just, that's all it does.
couple last points on patrol. The Sally Port and prisoners are adjacent to patrol, right?
Yes.
And Chief Newport has been adamant about that.
Yeah.
Yes, and like when we take a tour of some of these other police stations, I will show you the risk and liabilities that are in place based off of the designs that they did. Like, for instance, Rochester PD, you have to go up like they have an elevator that goes up into the booking area from the Sally Port, because otherwise it's like 5 steps. That's, to me, is a liability, because sometimes you're dealing with people who are not cooperative. And to get from the car to the booking area can be an issue, so.
The detective, here's a layout that you see that the detectives are, you know, around the edges of this room. You've got your sergeants and lieutenants and maybe a captain, I suppose. And here's where they work. But hard interview room, soft interview room, interview waiting. So you're seeing that, and a lot of what, maybe you guys can explain that better, but
Yeah, it's just like the adjacencies. And actually, in our detective division now, the layout that we have there is efficient for what we do there. You know, so going into the space we designed, detectives was going to be moved into a different division, so, you know, we'd have a different, somewhat of a different layout, but that's only because the space we have is more accommodating than what we have now, where we're forced to work with what we have down there now, and if we're building a new station, we're going to build it for the future, not just for now, to have room for growth, and also the technology and what we do changes every year. Like, you know, ICAC, it's the Internet Crimes Against Children. You know, we have a crime lab, it's Internet Crime Lab. You know, it's a closet downstairs now. But if we were to build for the future, it would be a room like this with a lab, like, you know, with technology like cell phones. We have to put them in a thing called a Faraday box so that you can't access it remotely like you can now. But in a new police station, that would be a room, not just a lockbox that we could work in and not have to, you know, be moving equipment in and out of. So.
And there are two, in Rockingham County, there are like two Cellebrite, which is like how they extract the information from these, and that's in Derry and Portsmouth.
Yeah.
So everywhere, when you think about it, like other communities are coming to Portsmouth to do, you know, to look at electronics for crime, when there are concerns about crimes against children.
As a part of that grant, like, we have equipment that the majority of institutions in New Hampshire don't have. So that's why they come to us, because we have the equipment through the ICAC grant that funded it, that's paid for the equipment, which is an advantage of us hosting that.
Yeah, I think that's important for everybody to know. That's a federally funded grant, so.
Right. But what it does, it is also allows us to prioritize our own investigation.
Yep, Cameron?
So that's really helpful, Mark. And to click on that one step further, with things like ICAC, where we have grant money funding the programs right now, as we look at these considerations in the context of building net new space or rehabbing our existing space, or in the context of this project holistically, I guess, to just not get into the weeds here, is it possible for us to consider looking to have additional grant funding that supports the build out of that space in support of that program? Because if the program itself is grant funded, then to me, kind of, we get into a sources and uses of funds conversation in terms of it's not currently a taxpayer line item, if you will. So how do we wrap our heads around that in the consideration of the overall budget? And what things that we have now should we be pursuing additional grant funding around based on the fact they're currently grant funded?
Grants are very specific.
Right. No, I understand that. And
So,
there's a
like,
whole
for
art to
all those
grant
things that
writing.
you're talking
Right.
about, there's a different grant for each phase of that.
Right. Completely understand.
So it just depends on what the availability is. And what's
Right.
out there,
Understood.
So.
I mean, I suspect that at every stage of the process, we're going to explore grants to try to, I mean, I think that, like,
Understood.
It's always going on.
I guess my point here is that there are things that we're not, as a municipality, currently directly funding, and so we should be considering what's incremental to our current operational and maintenance in terms of what we're taking on, because that's a space that we currently have, and the program itself is grant funded right now, if I'm understanding that. So expanding that directly as a taxpayer funded line item is something we should consider in the broader context of this project, and things like that that are currently grant funded.
I hear what you're saying, but the benefit that we receive by having that program far outweighs.
Right, and so we just need to, completely
What I'm
understand.
hearing you say is, if we've got the program, is there also another grant for bricks and mortar?
Right, because the program itself is not something we're paying for right now, if I'm
But
understanding.
we're benefiting from it. So like
Right.
if we have to have a, like, in the grand scheme of how much space it's
Yeah.
utilizing, it's relatively small for a very important law enforcement function.
Understood.
So I don't think we should be like,
Well, I'm not talking about this line item specifically. I'm using that as an example to talk about other things that we have that are grant funded. And I know there are thousands of grants and all of them require a process, and grant writing itself is an art. I'm not here to tell anyone who works for the city of Portsmouth how to write grants, and that's not my expertise. I'm asking the question in terms of our budget currently has certain things that are taxpayer funded and other things that are grant funded. And on the list of things that are grant funded, with this being one example, we should be considering whether or not we want to expand the budget of a project to fund things that are existing grant funded things. Not saying this is something we shouldn't fund. I'm saying that all the things that are grant funded, we should put an asterisk next to those and understand how we could maybe pursue incremental funds to support that, because there's clearly a willingness at the federal level to support certain things.
How long is this grant funded for?
We've had this grant since I've been here since I just started in 1998.
But it's a one-year grant.
Oh, it renews every year,
Yes.
but
Right.
it's been renewed. The state's actually kicked in.
But it could stop,
Could stop.
depending on what happens in Washington.
Yeah. So,
Related to
I'm
this-
just going to, if I could just finish up on property and evidence, because I thought
Yeah.
this was a useful slide.
It is.
There's a flow to evidence. Kate or Chief Newport, maybe you want to explain that, but it's the next one,
okay.
the custody chain.
So as you saw when we took the tour of the police station in the evidence room, police officers come in, they bring that in, they go to an evidence submittal room where they put into those lockers. It goes from the lockers into our evidence room, which we have evidence technicians that work in there. In a modern station, those lockers are connected to the evidence room, so they can just pull them through the lockers without having to go into the separate room and remove it and bring it in. And then from there, you also have some evidence that needs to be processed, so you have processing rooms where detectives or people that have been trained to process the evidence will remove certain pieces of evidence to process. That's when we talk about, like, having garage bays, not a separate garage, but a bay close by the evidence room where, you can process cars or large items in a bay relative to where the evidence rooms are. So those are all the adjacencies similar to what you have here and the importance of them.
Yeah, and, typically where you see the custody chain start, there's lockers that the couple of detectives can open from their side, put something in, and then the evidence folks can open it from the other side of the wall,
Just bring it
pull
up.
it out. And then, it goes into either storage or forensics in the labs. But that's sort of really basic workflow
Right.
that we don't have a lot of space for.
Right, which now is in 5 different places in the police department, and you have to, there's no adjacencies like that.
So that,
That's important.
I just want to say that I agree with Cameron's comments regarding the grants. I think that's important to know. I think that we need to access them as often, as many as we can, but for us to know which grants cover which aspects of the police functioning is really an important part, I think, as we go through. We're not doing budget, but it's something for us to look at, I think.
This is an important conversation for us to always be having, and it's important to ask these questions. I've been asking about the emergency response team, the CERT, and how is that paid for? Because we store the vehicle here in Portsmouth for the Seacoast. So, how much of our cost, our taxpayers' cost
Right.
is for housing that vehicle that others maybe aren't paying?
Right.
And so, but that model is an unusual one in the way everyone pays in for the service. So we have different models for how things are paid for, and it's hard to understand all of them and how they're all, how all of that functioning occurs. But when we're building a new facility to store a CERT vehicle, we always need to ask. I think it's important for our taxpayers to know. And why is it a priority that we have it here? So that's always an important question, which
Right.
I've asked, and I know the answer to, so.
Right.
Yeah.
To your point on that, Kate, with respect to things like grant-funded line items, to the extent that we're building brick and mortar, and we may have programs that are grant-funded, we may ought to seek to find funding support from communities who are using those resources and build a coalition around what we think the region needs, not just our municipality. Obviously, those are complicated things to get into, but it's just when one municipality foots the bill for a lot of other surrounding communities, we should be sensitive to the fact that as much as we can, trying to recover funds from folks that utilize resources developed by this municipality, we should be doing that.
I was going to call those potentially self-funded parts of the building. You know, I asked the question in your conference room, if you know, when you try to get officers from other departments in there, you don't charge for it, but are there other things that could be shared, force-on-force training areas, or I don't know, you know, it's your world, not mine, but
Right.
things like that other departments might pay for, that then the Portsmouth Department could use most of the time, except for those special events. So for you to think about.
I mean, I understand what you guys are saying, but we also go to all other agencies and use their facilities for
other
training
things.
and other things, so.
So it's all shared.
It's all shared.
Okay.
So if you're getting into that, we're going to charge you for this, then they're going to, I mean, it just gets into a battle of the bottom in a way that.
I thought everybody was coming here, so if it's all shared.
That's not true.
No, no. And there's a level of mutual aid that takes place among police departments that, you know, I think it's more important to, when you look at the big picture and the ways we utilize other things, that getting into that
You know,
goes down a slippery slope, I believe.
as far as like the CERT team, there's equipment that's stick at all different police departments within the Seacoast region that make up the team. We host some of it. Exeter hosts some, not Exeter, Hampton hosts some, Rye some. It's spread out through the community. The advantage of hosting it is you have access to it immediately. You know, so those are the benefits that outweigh you know, maybe the cost. You know, as far as the brick and mortar, like everything that we're hosting now, we had our own in-house SWAT team, and we had all of the equipment, the truck, the vehicle, all that stuff. So we had the space already. You know, then when we merged and made a regional team, we just kept the things that we already had. But it has access to the whole regional team now owns the property. So, you know, it wasn't built specific.
That makes
just for
sense.
that.
Yeah.
And we do have mutual aid agreements with towns, and there are reimbursement
soft
mechanisms
benefits
that do occur, especially around fire, I think, mostly
Fire,
for,
more so
Or
than
so,
Yeah.
please, but
Right.
DPW as well.
yeah. So we do those things as a community. It's just, it's not always
a
obvious.
quantitative exercise. It's qualitative. Understood.
Yeah, right. I mean, ICAC, I think, gets renewed because they deliver a lot of results.
Right.
Right. I mean, no objection there.
I mean, the ICAC is not, that's statewide.
Right.
The whole entire state.
Right.
We're just the hub of it. We're the holder of the grant.
Right.
Which therefore, we also get
You and Derry.
paid positions
oh, have the
that are
slate.
funded out of that grant as well.
Right. Here and in Derry.
No.
No.
we-
Oh,
just us.
Just us.
Yeah.
I was just saying where the dump, where they can look in.
Understood. So
They
there's
have some of the-
infrastructure
Some-
there,
some.
but the
Right.
understood. Okay.
And I can tell you from working for other police departments, if other police departments could, you know, because
They would take it in a heartbeat if
they could, yes, exactly. I mean, it's high demand and, you know, a timing issue.
Right. Understood.
Did I leave anything out that the committee should know based on those slides?
No, I think everybody gets the gist of what the slides here are and, you know, the importance of the adjacencies.
Yep.
I vividly remember, and my fellow petitions probably do too, we came in one morning and they said, you guys know the adjacencies. They gave us colored blocks
I have a photograph of that, of
for
us around the table.
each of the departments and said, here's a 1-story, here's a 2-story, here's a 3-story. Do your adjacencies. Maybe we should.
Did you pass?
Maybe there's a play-at-home version we can get of that.
I'll share that photograph with you, Counselor, and you can bring it to the meeting. It's all of us around the table literally doing that adjacency exercise. It was interesting.
So, I mean, with that said, we did all that within the confines of our current facility.
Right.
And we couldn't do it. So, you know, the next best object was, the next best option was to build a freestanding police department. We had the 5 sites. It came in from 62 million to 72 million, which is completely way over the budget. So we had to go back to the drawing board. How we could do this and stay within the confines of our budget. And what we presented is the best that we could do to give us the necessary requirements that we need to have a modern facility that we can grow into
Using
and
as-
stay here on this campus.
And using as much as we can of this building
Right.
in light of the infrastructure challenges that
Yep.
live with this building.
But if I can just add to that, using the current, what's currently in the building on strictly the police side. So now, the next step during this process is when we had the working group, didn't have the option of looking, frankly, at the municipal
Right.
space.
Understood.
And now this is, the process has moved to that point now.
Right, that's our task.
That's
as
our
a committee,
task. That's our task.
is to
And-
go from there.
And get a customer center, point of customer contact. So that brings us to some considerations of the work of the next couple of weeks. If I could dare, I would summarize where we are as, we've agreed that a good starting point is that 2016 space study. We talked about, could we push out some areas in the back? Could we bulge out if that's not enough space? And in April, we'll have a gut check on the police staffing and space through the matrix study. And we'll also have, late April, May, we'll have a design firm. So
Can I just,
a lot of information to come in April, late April.
if there's anything, if there's an interim report that can be provided, you know, I don't know the process you're dealing with, that's your area, not mine. But if there is something that is interim prior to a final report from the firm, that can be something that would be beneficial.
Which firm are we talking about?
From Matrix. So
The
yes.
space study.
Yeah, that is the April
April.
delivery.
Okay,
That's
Yeah,
the
an
interim.
That's not final.
okay, that's fine.
Final is
Okay.
June, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
So we have a month in between now and in April, maybe more like a month and a half before we get that's interim, those interim numbers back. And so we wanted to suggest work plan between now and then.
Right. And should we continue at an every other week tempo? You know, the two chairs and the city manager and Director Rice, we thought this might be a little window to tour some other stations. But other than that, we want to listen to what you guys think.
John, is it possible, and I think the city manager and the facilities manager and the DPW director, they already know in their head what the deficiencies are in the city hall space. I think that's something we should address so that we know that before we get all the way done, that there are things that need to be done. I'm sure they already know it.
Yeah, plumbing, electrical, HVAC.
Mechanical finishes.
Coatings, yeah, finishes. A lot of the plumbing fixtures are not ADA compliant. I mean, that one study, the IAC study that's in there, gives you a list. It was $11 million worth of deferred maintenance. A big chunk of that was the facade of the 62 building. That got dealt with. But
$4
you know,
million, correct, at the time?
Yeah, it ended up being $4 million, which originally is into the IAC. It was a lot less than that.
Windows is another one
Oh, yeah.
that's probably,
Windows can be done, yeah.
Absolutely.
So we got rid of the leaking roof, we got rid of the,
No.
Yeah, we had a lot of slate work done. We had,
Roofs leak.
It's just
whether
like,
you see it or not.
Peter is always the
Do they
voice of
directorize?
realism.
Yeah, depending upon wind and you name it.
We just completed over the past couple of years a full repointing of from here all the way down, both sides, repointing and sealing of the brick. There was a lot of masonry work that had to be done.
Yep.
Is that part of the facade project, or is that?
No, that was
incremental?
separate.
Okay.
That was separate, yeah.
New emergency generator, which can cover the operations of the entire building.
Entire building,
Been completed.
every outlet works.
Yep, so new electrical service, MCC, motor control gear.
one of the other things we need to know is what arrangements with Portsmouth Housing Authority, how many parking spaces go to Connors Cottage? And,
And I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear how that's relevant to.
well, it is because in some of the designs, we're taking parking away. So we got to see what
Front portion of the
we
building.
lined up with.
I think we're very mindful of minimizing or not taking away any parking, and the Connors Cottage specific parking is on the other side of the building.
It is, okay.
Does not
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that
commingle with the upper lot of City Hall.
That latest design that we had didn't impact really any parking in the front.
Right, it was just the access road.
Correct.
Right.
I think what it did,
And that
it
got
might have
miti- that got
impacted your
mitigated as
4
well.
spots out front.
Our
We
4
actually
P
added a lot
spots.
of parking with the concept around underneath.
Lower, yeah, underneath and on the long.
We were parallel
Right.
parking on, even on that roadway, the widening it, so we were adding parking, not taking it away, in that last rendition that we presented.
Well, coming back to the chair's question, if the chief and, the police commission chair think it would be helpful for us to see these other departments, it seems like a good time to do that.
Agreed.
But, I mean,
Yes, I would agree.
given the level of my ignorant questions already, you can see I don't know much about police stations, and I think it would be helpful, to me, anyway, but.
What I don't know is the logic of going to stations that are already antiquated and not working. I don't
No,
understand why we'd go to Dover or to.
Those two know. I think you should say where.
Let's hear from Kate and then John.
Dover.
Well, I just had one idea that maybe we could, one place, it's a little different, but the sheriff's department is under construction right now in Brentwood, and I could probably arrange, I mean, it is like very much a construction site still, but it might be a good opportunity to just, they do have, it's not analogous, because the sheriff's department role is, although law enforcement is different, they're statutorily tasked differently than a police department, but some of the adjacencies, having some of that space, what dispatch, those things, it might, there's a place that's under construction that we could see some of those current adjacencies.
It'll give you
and
an
I could-
idea of a modern facility.
Given that it's under construction, it might be worthwhile to try and get the plans in advance of that, so we can kind of look at the layout and then see it. We see it from a kind of in-context standpoint. And
Typically,
I know
those
a
are all.
guy.
I would imagine
know a
that
guy.
they're available through the county website or something to that end.
I can make that.
We were going to tour Dover, weren't we? Yeah.
Dover should be.
But
all
I
right.
mean, if that's something that people are interested in, I can try to facilitate a tour. I mean, I have to ask, but.
John?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting, and the fact is that, yeah, I think we should look at, our, the latest plan for the police department so we can see it. Kate's idea with regards to the sheriff. One of the things that's interesting, having been through this thing, and Kate kind of mentioned it a little bit, and the fact is that on the municipal side, you know how to act, how you would want to access the tax collector's office and the city clerk's office, et cetera. When we were dealing, and I hate to keep bringing it up, when we were dealing with the library, I probably went into 100 different libraries. First of all, they're all wide open. So you go into a town, you don't need to get an invitation to go visit, so it was easy to do. Plus the fact is, I'm a consumer, so I walk in there and I know what feels good to me. just like when you walk into City Hall and you can get easily to the city clerk's office, it feels good to you and you're a consumer. You go in the police department, and hopefully you're not a consumer. And so understanding how things, adjacencies work in a police department is not something that we as a consumer normally do. So that's why we need to get the input, and talk to us about, I mean, one of the things, and I may be wrong with regards to this, but, when we went to Dover, the evidence is on one floor and the detectives are 2 floors away. I mean, does that make any sense? The detectives have to come down 2 floors to look at, I mean, those are the types of things that wouldn't mean anything to me, except gets pointed out to me by the professionals.
Well, in that regard, if we get that tour, would there be somebody there to say, this is what we've learned from this? This isn't working?
Well, let's put it this way. You might have that conversation, but maybe not with the people who designed it.
Right.
No, the users, you want the users, not the designers.
Yeah, and, every agency is different, because, like, for example, with Dover, they went from, like, literally 8,000 square feet to, like, 30,000 square feet. So there's a lot of things you don't know, because you're not thinking about it because of the cramped space that they're already in. Any new space is better than what they are in. Again, like I stated before, is we have a good-sized police department here. It's just not designed efficiently. So we're going to be more particular than maybe Dover was or Rochester was when they built their PDs, because they were going from almost nothing to a legitimate police department.
But isn't Dover's not the shiny new toy anymore? They've been in it for a little while, right?
Yeah, I mean, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a new police station that's open in the last 2 years.
No, and that's not, in terms of people using it, when they first move in, as you said, going from 8 to 30, wow, this is fantastic.
Right.
But after you've been there a year or so, well, maybe not so
Things we could
much.
have done differently.
So-
Yeah, there are things. I mean, whatever we build, they're going to be something that we'll go back and look at. Like Manchester PD is a great example. They're a lot bigger than us, but if you go back there now and say, well, we would have done this stuff different, we would have done that different. But again, they didn't build a standalone police station. They had a building that was already there that they had to conform to their needs.
Mary Lou?
Exeter has a plan in place, correct, for not only police, but they're doing a fire substations, but they haven't broken ground on that yet.
No.
But it might be something to look at their
Yeah,
plans.
I mean, it's going to be, theirs is going to be a lot smaller. Then they're going from the same situation as like a Dover, from a building this size to a new facility that's being shared with a fire department.
Yeah.
So it would be more comparable to like Northampton's police station that was just done. So
Yeah.
it's really not going to give you a perspective of something that it's not.
Yeah, there are a
done
few
yet.
towns that are doing the combination, Wells, Maine, Northampton, Exeter.
If we're looking at some construction that's starting up, Salem, New Hampshire approved about a $40 million, 40,000 square foot new police station. And that, interestingly, their force is a little smaller than Portsmouth's, but somewhat analogous. They are smaller from a from a staffing perspective, but it might be, that's an easy one that we can track a little bit and see. I'm sure they have designs in the works, and I can.
They have designs in the works,
Yeah.
but they're knocking down their old police station and building a new place on the same
site, but it's worthwhile in the sense of it's probably the closest thing we have in terms of force size with relatively similar building size and cost. I mean, it really met, that project really mets out
Yeah.
with the numbers we had.
And if I could, there's, I don't know how far we want to reach about, in looking at or considering other stations. The town of Middleton, Massachusetts, on their website, they have a wonderful website defining their project. It's under construction now, 48,000 square feet. It's a combination, it's a public safety building, combination fire and police. But they have, they share their budgets, all the designs, everything.
What town is that?
Square foot on that one? Middleton, Mass.
So 48,000 square feet, $74 million.
Yeah.
How much
All,
does-
all in,
Yeah.
all full project costs, $74 million for 48,000 square feet.
Does that
Brand new
include land?
Say it again?
Land in that?
All brand new, including land, everything.
Purchase of land.
Yeah. And Bedford is also building a new combination facility.
Looking on Bedford, I didn't see it on their website. It was kind of hiding if it's there. but-
It is there somewhere, because I saw the
Yeah.
plans and everything. One of the things that I've asked specifically is if we're doing some tours, I would like to see a municipal building too. Because I think it's really, really important that we remember that the purpose of this committee is not just to focus on the police, but to focus on the entire municipal side, because we have to. If we're not, if you remember, the council didn't want the addition in the front. So we have to be thinking about the whole municipal side, because if we're going to be using space in this building, or repurposing space in this building, or doing an addition somewhere else in this building, that's going to impact municipal. So,
Do you know the answer to the question if the school department could move out of the building?
We don't know the answer to the question. That's something we can pursue as we bring on the design firm and start to talk about things, but
But
Gain space.
I would push back in terms of, the organization of how we put things together and where people are really not necessarily the purview of this committee. If we, as part of this exercise, identify opportunities, I would recommend it to the city manager, and then the city manager would take consideration. So it's municipal function in terms of where people go, and with all due respect.
I would agree with Peter, but I think your point is well taken. It is something we will certainly look at when we consider how best to utilize the space we have. Does everybody in this building need to be in this building? And
The
can they
reason
go
I ask
elsewhere?
is I've heard from numerous people that there's space, unused space in other school buildings.
Right.
that
Well, and the
I don't know if that's
redistricting,
true. I don't-
the redistricting efforts may alter that a little bit, so it's certainly an item that's on the table.
And that's why last week, last meeting, I suggested that the municipal side look at reconfiguration with and without the school department. So, and, in consideration of that, that was,
And that would be a management thing, even if this committee didn't exist. You're
oh,
right.
yeah, no question about it.
Is there a lease with them? Do they have a lease?
They do not.
No.
They do not. Tenant at will.
They are a department of the city. So that's a little step up from a tenant at will, I would say.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is Salem, Dover, maybe Middleton, and then any new municipal buildings.
Middleton at the same time is building municipal on that same
I would
lot?
say municipal would look at the county building that they're building in Brentwood.
I think when
Yeah.
you say municipal, you're talking about
City Hall.
general government.
Right.
general government.
Government.
General government. And if there's a retrofit somewhere that we can look at, because we're committed to this location, so we have to be, we're not building a new facility. So it's great to look at all the new facilities to see adjacencies and to understand how that works and what, priorities should be. But we are retrofitting one way or another.
Okay, next item.
Public comment. Please come up here and give your name and address.
Sure. My name is Bob Arash. I'm a
Into the
resident
mic,
here in
please.
town.
Yeah.
And I've been attending the prior meetings as well as the committee meetings. And one thing I wanted to thank this committee was to
Your microphone.
allow us to have the tour of the existing facilities, including the police department. Very, very informative. One of my concerns is that in the prior report, the 2015 report, they mentioned the $11 million worth of infrastructure that was needed in the entire municipal complex here, not just the police department. And my question is, or at least what I would find very enlightening, is what remains to be done for the entire building, irrespective of whether it's a police department or the tax collector's office or whatever. If you've got rodents, if you've got mold, if you've got leakage, you've got condensation, you've got a whole list of environmental issues, those transcend just the police department. They go to the whole complex. And what of those $11 million worth of projects which were deficient 10 years ago are nevertheless still an issue, and where are we going on those? What is the cost, and is the approach to fix them as they need to be fixed, or are we just putting Band-Aids on matters, and saying, well, we can't get to this because it costs too much money right now as a bulk, so we'll put $100,000 every year onto it. But at some point, that becomes a questionable practice, and with this committee's assignment going beyond the police department, which I think is very good, we want to see the whole building, so that if the police department didn't have a particular place or space, we don't want that rat infestation to, to be in, in some other, the school department.
Bob, I just got to, there is not a rat infestation in this building. There was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. There is not a rat infestation in this building.
Okay.
The general public hears that, it'll be picked up. There's not. We have regular
Monthly
reports.
from pest control.
I thank you.
So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right.
Just all
Thank
due
you for
respect.
correcting me. I thought within the police department, there was a box or something that said something about rodents.
Well, we still have the boxes, they're still there, but the boxes are still there, but.
Okay,
The-
all right.
the
Well,
problem has been addressed.
That's good. That's good to know, so we can get rid of the boxes.
So the rodent control is an ongoing thing. In an old city like this,
Yeah.
with old buildings, rodents have a tendency to go into areas that have food sources, and it is a constant, you have to be vigilant.
Right.
And so we have a contract with a regular rodent control
Exterminator,
person, and not an exterminator, it's a control organization, and they bait areas around, and they monitor those bait areas to look for activity.
Right.
So it is something that's constantly,
Right.
I get reports every month.
Yeah.
And it is something that we are very cognizant of. So I just
Good.
want to put that to rest, because that gets floated out there on a regular basis,
Right.
and that is inaccurate.
Great. So we can cross that off the list, which is
No,
good.
you have to continue to
I understand it's a
maintain
maintenance issue.
vigilance.
It's a maintenance.
Yeah, I understand. It's a maintenance issue.
Constant
But my
vigilance.
point is, what other major things, condensation, leaking pipes, the front facade and so forth, where do we stand on those now? What's the approach going forward to that for the entire building? I think that would be a good baseline for everyone to have that information, in addition to going ahead with the reconfiguration of the police department as well as other, municipal offices.
I can speak to that if you'd like, Bob.
Yeah.
So the philosophy has been address critical items immediately. The facade off the building, it was literally falling off, it was peeling away from the building. That was an emergency, it had to get done. So as part of that, we said, well, let's address the windows system and the whole thing. The next thing was the roofs. Roofs were leaking like sieves, so the roofing system had to be dealt with. The next thing beyond that was the brickwork around the balance of this building. It wasn't sealed, it needed to be repointed. That was addressed. The roofing on the slate portion of the building was addressed. The emergency generator, backup generator, was done, so the new electrical service was addressed. And the challenge that we're at now is that we are ready to do a lot of these things, but where we do not have direction relative to the police station, it is hard to make investments in the building that would potentially preclude better decisions as part of the project. So we do not want to strand costs or strand investments that will then end up tearing them out and reworking. So we need to have some level of direction before we make some other decisions. Obviously, moisture control is an ongoing challenge. We are continuing to address that. If there's identified plumbing, things like that, wear and tear on carpet, general things we do as resources allow. There are some code compliant issues, ADA fixtures in bathrooms. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. Are they so critical that they need to be bumped up on the queue? No. So there's that critical level, which is like, are we going to lose critical infrastructure within the building if a pipe breaks? Those have to be addressed immediately. Are there things that we can hold on? Carpets, wallpaper, painting, So it's a prioritization. So that has been our philosophy. We've gone back to council, and council has been very supportive of continuing to add money to our capital plan. We went from $1 million every 3 years to up that to, it's almost $1 million every year now. That reflects the enormity of, we have close to, 300,000 square feet of building?
And that's citywide.
That's
It's not
citywide.
just this building. That million is for all of our buildings.
But this building has dominated that,
Absolutely.
the demand associated with that.
This is I refer to it as the mothership. Yep. This was the biggest, the biggest.
So if I understand you correctly, and I appreciate your information on that, there is basically a list of more critical things and a list of things which might be down the road depending on finances and so forth.
Yep.
And then in addition, as the focal point of the police station becomes a little more defined, then you'll be able to say, well, yes, if we're going to have the police station here, then we need to do X, Y, and Z
Correct.
to accommodate that particular use. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Good. Sounds good.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comment from you, Bob?
What?
Any other comment, Bob?
No, I think it's great, and I appreciate all of the work that you're doing and the expertise that you bring to the table, and it's good to have public availability and public meetings.
Thank you very much.
It's good. Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Sue?
Come on, Sue.
Yeah, this is just I'm Susan Sterry, I guess we're supposed to say that. A clarifying question. So what I've gotten out of the last two meetings is that right now we're waiting for a company that will come in and not design, but say what we need for space for the municipal side, and we've already done it for the police side, right? So then once we have that information, we're going to hire somebody that will design the overall project, take what we've already done, incorporate it into what needs to be done on the municipal side, and make one great big plan. And then what I'm concerned about the most is at that point when they start designing, then those people will meet with like the experts with the police station, the experts with whatever the fundamentals are for the municipal, and then what's needed for design for office space and those types of things. And then once 2 or 3 designs have been made from that, does it come back to this committee? They don't decide, but they recommend to the city council, and then public hearings will be, because what I heard here is that, everybody should be informed what adjacency means and all those kinds of things, but I was sort of starting to be concerned that people thought everybody had to be an expert in a certain field to put this plan all together. No. So the people that use it and work with it will work with the designer.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're just, so you know, we're just trying to get the background, everybody on the same page, because a lot of members here haven't been part of the process for the last few years, and so we want to make sure that we're bringing everyone kind of up to speed with others who have been part of the process. And also the first study we should be receiving is the staffing needs study for the police side, which will also address space. We'll get an interim report in April, and then a final report in June. And that RFP is for that design side that will look at both, yeah.
Right. I'm just, I don't think you can have too much knowledge, but sometimes it gets lost in who's going to do what. So, thank you.
Dick? Hello.
So I just wanted to make a couple comments. About 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more, when I was president of One Sky, I got heavily involved with the municipal complex building. And then I got involved with the police commission and the police commissioner at the time, excuse me.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Dick Bagley.
What's that?
Dick Bagley on Pleasant Street.
Okay, thank you. I had no idea.
That's okay. And what I learned at that time, and Peter addressed part of this, is that 11 million is ridiculous. He knows, and we know, it's a lot more than that. And the whole infrastructure of the building, you got an old hospital building that isn't remotely designed. And Joe can talk about this in much greater detail than I can. You've got a third floor that we tried to modernize and bring One Sky in. It was a joke. Talking to the school board was equally difficult because the school board operates independently, as we know, but as city manager pointed out, it's part of our municipal complex. So I was a little surprised when Peter sort of said, I thought, in talking with Daglin about the purpose of this committee, which I had hoped to serve on and didn't get elected, but that's okay. I thought the whole point was to bring the municipal complex into a whole. So I was surprised Peter said, well, that's off grounds. We can't talk about the school board. Well, the whole idea is the school board's a major occupant of the building. We're chasing our tails. How many times do we have to talk about adjacency? We're all intelligent people. We know what adjacency is. It's a financial issue. We don't like the cost. And we don't have the land, let alone the cost. So we have to make do with what we have. And this committee, I thought, was actually designed to figure out what we're going to do in this building, as with all of its warts. And as Peter pointed out, it's going to cost a bloody fortune. It'll cost more than the original design when you get to the end and you're going to have an inadequate facility. But the city council has made a decision to move forward. And John, you've been working on, the middle school and the library, and you all know that was built on quicksand, and it's sinking. And it was a political decision that we wanted it downtown as opposed to a cost decision about how do we have an effective modern-day police building within a cost that the city of Portsmouth residents can afford. That's the key issue. And we're not addressing it. We're arguing about adjacencies. We're not on the West Coast. We don't have land. But I bet we could buy some land because there's a lot of developers that love to sell you some land. So the question is, for this committee, I thought was, is there a way forward with community representation? Is there a way forward to bring the school board, the police department, and the municipal facilities, the assessor's office and clerks, and all, in a reasonable way in this building for $42 million?
That's what we're doing.
And I was disappointed today in that what I heard Peter say, well, we're not going to talk about the school board. I thought that was the purpose.
My point, if I could clarify, was that the charter is very clear about the organization and operation of the city government. That is the purview of the city manager. My job is to represent the process and to provide you the information and gather input, but it is not to expect a committee that does not, it is not responsible for operation of the city to direct what we do and we don't do. We can take input, but we're not saying, okay, you are now in charge of organizing the city operations. That was my intent. It wasn't that we can't talk about those things. It was just at the end of the day, this is the city manager's purview, and it is not something that can be delegated to a committee.
And to take that further, we will abide by the budget that we've been ascribed and understand the exercise is to include a modern set of updates to the police facility along with as many modern updates to the rest of the complex. Period.
Yeah, well,
And a single point of service for customers.
Right.
I understood all of that, and I think my comment was along, how could this committee plan if they don't have the information you're going to get from the municipal services side? What are you going to do with the school board? What information are you requesting of them in terms of how many occupancies they need? You've done all this building by extending it. You can do it for $42 million, and you can get adjacencies, but it blocks the view. So is that what's going to determine what you're going to do, is the fact that the Portsmouth Housing Authority residents are going to have their block view? I understand the concept, but I only came here today because I read the minutes of the last committee, and as Mary Lou said, you know, what is it that we really know, and what is the real objective of the committee? It's not to do, I understand what you're saying, Peter, it's not to tell some other, the police commission is just as independent as the school board and the fire department. You should be saying the same thing about the police department as you're saying about the school board. But there's a decision that they're asking for money that's under the purview of the city manager. I get that. I understand that. So I'm not trying to get emotional or upset. I think the time has come that the city council has made a decision that it wants to stay on this site. And there are going to be tremendous costs associated with that that haven't been identified. And I thought the purpose of this committee was to bring the taxpayers into agreement that why this is the best way to go forward, and that it can be done at a reasonable cost to the taxpayers. Just as simple as that. I apologize if I got off track.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick. Any other public comment? Okay. If not, we'll adjourn.
Can you get a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
So the plan, excuse me, before we adjourn, the plan is to set up time when we can all get together and go off to Dover or wherever we're going. That's the next, will that be in place of the next meeting?
Correct.
Yes, and if possible, I don't know if this is possible, but maybe we'll try to schedule it at the same time, because everyone has that time reserved. So,
Okay. Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
That would be much appreciated.
Marching on.